In 1912, not all ships carried wireless apparatus, and certainly very few were manned 24 hours. At 12:15 a.m. on the 14th of April, the telegram operator on the Californian turned in for the night, 5 minutes after the Titanic's first distress calls.
We also called up this ship as she drew closer with a Morse lamp, a very powerful Morse lamp that we had. And eventually this steamer approached and approached until you could see all our lights with a naked eye. And I should say that she must have been within 5 miles off. You could not only see her lights with a naked eye, but you could see the lights in her portholes. So I reckon that she must have been within 5 miles. And then eventually she turned away and showed a stern light.
Other ships answered the Titanic's increasingly urgent SOS messages, but all of them were hours away.
In the darkness of the night,
as the mystery ship on the horizon faded from view, the Titanic's crew prepared to fill the lifeboats.
Crew soon realized the sea must be their tomb. The order came to lower the boat, and one thing had to be: the women and the children first, for that's the way at sea.
When the boats were stripped and cleared, they were swung out and lowered to the level of the boat deck. Just a little while before they were ready to swing out, I happened to meet the captain, and I asked him, by cupping my hands over his ear and yelling at the top of my voice, "Shall I get the women and children away, sir?" He just nodded, so I started to fill the first boat. Just about now, thank goodness, the roar of escaping steam stopped, and passengers, now they could hear themselves think, started asking me, "Why are you getting the boats out? And why are you putting women and children in them?" I told them it was merely a precaution, and that very likely they'd all be taken on board again at daylight.
As everybody knows, the tragedy of the Titanic was the fact that she hadn't got enough lifeboats. So it was only the people who were there first who got into a lifeboat, and we were in plenty of time. The boats weren't even being lowered when we got up onto the deck. And my father went away and spoke to one of the sailors, and he came back and said, "Oh, we've hit an iceberg." Again, my mother didn't say, "Oh, have we?" or "Where is it?" She just said nothing. And my father went away again and came back and said, "Oh, I've just spoken to one of the officers. They're going to launch the lifeboats, but you'll all be back on board for breakfast." And so, thinking that this was what was going to happen, they started to lower the boats, and my father put my mother and I in one without any trouble at all. As I say, if we'd still been down in the cabin asleep, we would have got on the deck too late. So it's only because my mother had a premonition that I'm able to talk to you today. There's no doubt about that. My father made no attempt to get in himself. He helped other women and children, and, well, that was it, and never saw him again.
The officer came along and said, "Women and children first." So my father came up and he says, "Put my mother and I into a lifeboat." And he was smoking his cigar, and then he walked away. And, well, they wouldn't believe the boat was sinking.
No one believed that the ship was actually in any danger. I'm afraid my own confidence that she wouldn't or couldn't sink rather conveyed itself to others. For there were actually cases where women absolutely refused to be put in a boat. I remember one young couple, evidently not long married, walking up and down the boat deck. I asked the girl, she was only a girl, from the western states I should say, if I should put her in a boat. But no, she wouldn't be parted from her husband. "Not on your life," she said. "We've started together and we'll finish together." Brave girl, but she didn't know how near that finish was. Certainly I didn't.
The first boats away didn't have many passengers on board. Well, they were afraid to go down. Well, it was a 70-foot drop to the water, and they didn't think she was going to sink. A few of the first boats on the port side got away, half filled, and don't forget, we had 16 lifeboats.
One of the few lucky passengers who got into one of those first boats was Lady Duff Gordon.
After the 3 boats had gone down, my husband, Miss Franks and myself were left standing on the deck. There were no other people on the deck at all visible, and I had quite made up my mind that I was going to be drowned. And then suddenly we saw this little boat in front of us, this little thing, and we saw some sailors and an officer apparently giving them orders, and I said to my husband, ought we not to be doing something? He said, oh, we must wait for orders, and we stood there for quite some time while these men were fixing up things, and then my husband went forward and said, might we get into this boat? And the officer said, in a very polite way indeed, oh, certainly do, I'll be very pleased. And then somebody hitched me up from the deck and pitched me into the boat. And then I think Miss Franks was pitched in. It was not a case of getting in at all. We could not have got in. It was quite high. They pitched us into the boat. And after we'd been in a little while, the boat was started to be lowered, and one American gentleman got pitched in, and another American gentleman was pitched in while the boat was being lowered down.
My mother was saying goodbye to my father, and he says, hopes to see you later. And we got into lifeboat number 13. Because I was small, I was put into a sack and lowered over the side of lifeboat number 13.
You've got to remember, the Californian had drifted away. There weren't enough boats to take half the people, and the chances of the other half in that icy cold water were absolutely nil. Yet, there was never the slightest attempt to get into a boat out of turn. In fact, with the last couple of boats, it was even difficult to find women to fill them, though of course there were still a good many on board.